very calm for strongly speaking.
Some people did something. Ilhan Omar walked into the Senate chamber believing she would walk out a martyr. She had survived worse. The refugee camps of Kenya, where she spent 4 years waiting for a chance at a new life. The attacks on her faith from the moment she entered politics. The death threats that filled her inbox every single day. The investigations that went nowhere because there was nothing to find. Or so she had convinced herself. She had always survived. She had built an entire career, an entire identity on the narrative of survival. The refugee girl who became a congresswoman. The Muslim woman who broke barriers. The voice of the voiceless. Today would be no different. Today she would face her accusers, and she would emerge stronger than ever. That was the story she told herself as her motorcade pulled up to the Capitol. She didn't know that Tim Minette had been wearing a wire for 4 months. She didn't know that her brother had given a sworn statement from London, providing details only a family member could know. She didn't know that by the end of this day, her entire life would be exposed as a carefully constructed lie, built on fraud, foreign money, and contempt for the country that had given her everything. J.D. Vance knew all of it, and he was about to tell the world. The vice president sat in the presiding chair, a position that had sparked a week of procedural fights before the hearing even began. Democrats had objected to a vice president presiding over an investigation of a House member. They had filed motions, demanded recusals, threatened boycotts. It hadn't mattered. The bipartisan committee had voted to proceed under existing rules, 73-27. The investigation would go forward. Vance's Marine Corps discipline was evident in every controlled movement, every measured breath. 4 years in the infantry had taught him how to remain calm when everything around him was chaos. His Yale law training showed in every prepared document, every anticipated objection. But underneath the polish was something Omar hadn't expected. Righteousness. The quiet, burning kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that waits patiently for the right moment to strike. This was that moment. "Before we begin," Omar said, leaning into her microphone without waiting to be recognized, "I want to state for the record that this proceeding is fundamentally illegitimate." Her voice carried the practiced confidence of 1,000 cable news appearances. She had done this so many times. Face the cameras, project strength, control the narrative. The Vice President of the United States has no business presiding over an investigation of a House member. This is political theater designed to intimidate a black Muslim woman who dares to question American foreign policy. This is Islamophobic persecution dressed up as congressional oversight. She looked directly at the cameras, knowing exactly which networks were carrying this live. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all of them. This was her stage. This is what happens when you speak truth to power in America. This is what they do to silence the voices they fear. The gallery stirred. Her supporters in the back rows, flown in from Minneapolis for exactly this purpose, nodded along. Some held signs, though they weren't supposed to. Security let them stay. Vance waited until she was completely finished. He had learned patience in places far more dangerous than Senate chambers. In Fallujah, patience had kept him alive. Here, it would serve a different purpose. The Congresswoman's objection is noted for the record. He said, his voice calm and level, and rejected. This committee was formed by a bipartisan vote of 73-27. The rules governing my role as presiding officer were approved by the same margin. The objection has no merit. He picked up a document from the stack in front of him. But before we debate procedure, let me read something that might clarify why we're here today. Omar's attorney, Marcus Webb, leaned forward in his chair. His instincts, honed over 30 years of defending politicians in trouble, were screaming at him. Something was wrong, something they hadn't anticipated. This is a sworn statement from Ahmed Noura Sedmi. Vance let the name hang in the air. Depending on which story the Congresswoman is telling today, he's either her ex-husband or her brother. The chamber went silent. Every reporter's pen froze above their notebooks. He can't be both, of course. That would be both biologically impossible and highly illegal. But the interesting thing is, according to this statement, he is in fact both. Omar felt the floor shift beneath her. How did they find Ahmed? He was supposed to be untraceable, living under a different name in the UK, protected by distance and time, and the assumption that no one would look hard enough. Marcus Webb shot to his feet. "Mr. Vice President, we request an immediate recess to review any new evidence that was not provided through proper discovery channels." Denied. Vance's voice was flat, final, the voice of a man who had made his decision long before this moment and would not be moved. The Congresswoman has had years to answer these questions. She has dismissed them as conspiracy theories. She has called anyone who asked them racist and Islamophobic. She has hidden behind her identity rather than addressing the substance. He opened the folder in front of him. Today she will address the substance, or she'll address it in federal court tomorrow. Either way, the truth comes out. He looked at the cameras. Let's begin. Vance arranged his documents with the methodical precision of a man who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. Every page was tabbed. Every exhibit was numbered. Every argument was anticipated. Congresswoman Omar, I want to be careful about how we discuss this first matter. Family issues are sensitive. Immigration histories can be complex. Cultural differences exist between communities. I understand and respect all of that. Omar forced herself to relax her shoulders. Project confidence, that was always the key. Never let them see you sweat. But the evidence I'm about to present isn't complex at all. It's actually very simple, and it's very damning. He held up a photograph. 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a modest house in what appeared to be Minnesota. The girl was clearly a young Ilhan Omar, perhaps 10 or 11 years old. The boy stood beside her with the unmistakable posture of a sibling. Same smile, same eyes. This photograph was taken in 1995, according to the date stamp. Minneapolis public school records identified these 2 children as Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noura Sedmi. They were enrolled at the same school. They had the same address. They had the same emergency contacts. And most importantly, he set the photo down and picked up official documents. They had the same parents listed on both enrollment forms. Omar's mind raced. How did he get the school records? Those were supposed to be protected, sealed, inaccessible without a court order. Father Nur Sahed Elmi, Mother Faduma Abukar Hussein. Vance read the names slowly, clearly making sure every syllable was captured by the microphones and the recording devices. These names are listed as parents for both Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noura Sahed Elmi, not as aunt and uncle, not as family friends, not as guardians. Parents, the same parents for both children. He looked at her. Unless Minneapolis public schools made the exact same clerical error on 2 different enrollment forms for 2 different children in 2 different school years, these documents indicate that you and Ahmed Elma have the same biological parents, which would make him your brother, Congresswoman, not your husband. Omar's attorney leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear. She waved him off with an irritated gesture. She had handled worse than this. That photograph proves absolutely nothing, she said, her voice steady. Somali families are large and complex. Extended relatives often live together under the same roof. Cousins are raised as siblings. Family friends take on parenting roles. This is a cultural difference that Americans with nuclear family structures often don't understand. Extended relatives with the exact same parents listed on official government documents. Vance pulled out the school enrollment forms and held them up for the cameras. I'm not talking about cultural complexity, Congresswoman. I'm talking about a box on a form that says mother and a box that says father, and both boxes have the same names for both you and Ahmed Elma. He set the forms down. But you're right. School records from 30 years ago could theoretically contain errors. So, let's look at something more recent, something that can't be explained away. He pulled out a new document. The header showed FBI letterhead. The classification markings had been redacted, but the official stamps were visible. This is a sworn statement taken by FBI agents in London, England, 3 weeks ago. The witness is Ahmed Nur Said Elme himself. The cold feeling in Omar's chest turned to ice. She had known this moment might come, had feared it for years, but she had convinced herself it never would. He's been living in the United Kingdom since 2013, working as an IT consultant under a slightly modified name, keeping a very low profile, avoiding social media, avoiding the Somali community, hiding, essentially. Vance looked at her until our investigators found him. It took 18 months of work, but we found him. He began reading from the statement. Quote, "My name is Ahmed Nur Sahed Elmi. I am the biological brother of Ilhan Omar, the United States Congresswoman. We share the same father and mother. We grew up in the same household in Somalia before the war, and in the same apartment in Minneapolis after we came to America." He paused to let the words sink in. In 2009, my sister proposed that we enter into a fraudulent marriage so that I could obtain immigration benefits in the United States. She said it was common in our community. She said many families had done it and never been caught. She said it was the only way for me to stay in the country legally. Another pause. I agreed. We obtained a marriage license and legally married in 2009. We never lived together as husband and wife. We never had a romantic relationship. The marriage was purely for immigration fraud purposes. Vance looked up at Omar. Quote, "She knew it was illegal. We both did. But we were told by a community elder that the American government rarely investigated these things, especially in immigrant communities. We thought we would be safe. We thought no one would ever find out." He turned to the final page of the statement. "I am giving this statement voluntarily. No one has threatened me or offered me anything. I am speaking because I am tired of living with this lie, and because my sister has become someone I no longer recognize. The things she says about America after everything this country did for our family. I cannot stay silent anymore. The hatred she expresses toward the nation that saved our lives. It is not what our parents taught us. It is not what I believe. And I cannot let her speak for our family any longer." End quote. Vance set the statement down. Your own brother, Congresswoman, giving a voluntary statement to federal agents, describing in detail a federal crime that both of you committed. Immigration fraud, document fraud, conspiracy. Omar's mind was spinning. Ahmed had always been the weak one, the one who couldn't handle pressure. Someone must have gotten to him, threatened him, paid him off, promised him something. That statement was obviously coerced, she said, fighting to keep her voice level. My brother has struggled with mental health issues throughout his life. He's vulnerable to manipulation. Someone clearly pressured him into, "So he is your brother." Omar stopped. The words echoed in the chamber. She heard what she had said, what she had admitted. "I misspoke. The stress of these proceedings is extreme. What I meant to say was that my ex-husband, you called him your brother, Congresswoman, on the record under oath in a hearing specifically about whether you illegally married your brother." She had walked directly into the trap. She could feel the cameras zooming in on her face, capturing every flicker of panic. "I would like to consult with my attorney before answering further questions on this matter. You can consult all you want, but the next piece of evidence doesn't require your input at all." Vance pulled out a laboratory report. It bore the letterhead of a nationally recognized forensic testing company. DNA analysis conducted by an independent, accredited forensic laboratory using samples obtained legally through discarded items collected from public spaces where both you and Mr. Elm had been present. Omar felt the room spinning. When had they collected DNA? Where? How? The results are conclusive. The two individuals tested share approximately 50% of their DNA. The probability of a full sibling relationship is 99.7%. Not cousins, not distant relatives, not family friends, full biological siblings, brother and sister sharing both parents. He set the DNA report down next to the school records and the sworn statement. School records showing you have the same parents. Your brother's sworn confession describing the fraud in detail. DNA evidence proving a full biological sibling relationship with scientific certainty, and your own words just now in this chamber calling him your brother. Vance looked at her with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "This isn't a conspiracy theory, Congresswoman. This is science. This is sworn testimony. This is documentary evidence. This is your own admission. You committed immigration fraud by entering into a sham marriage with your biological brother to help him obtain benefits he wasn't legally entitled to. That is a federal crime with a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison." Marcus Webb stood up. His face had gone gray. "Mr. Vice President, I need to confer with my client regarding her Fifth Amendment rights with respect to any questions that might. Your client can invoke the Fifth Amendment whenever she chooses. That is absolutely her right, and I will respect it completely." Vance's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "But the evidence has already been entered into the record. The Department of Justice already has copies of everything I've presented. What she says now only affects one thing: whether she looks guilty or whether she looks guilty and evasive." Omar sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had dismissed these allegations as racist conspiracy theories, right-wing smears, Islamophobic attacks designed to silence a Muslim woman who dared to speak truth to power. She had never prepared a real defense because she never truly believed she would need one. She had been catastrophically wrong. "I have nothing further to say on this matter." She finally managed, her voice barely audible. "On advice of counsel, I invoke my right to remain silent." Vance nodded slowly. "The Congresswoman invokes her Fifth Amendment right with respect to the immigration fraud allegations. Let the record reflect that she has declined to explain the school records, declined to rebut her brother's testimony, and declined to address the DNA evidence." He closed that folder and reached for another. "Now let's talk about something you definitely cannot remain silent about because it involves ongoing crimes, not past ones." He opened the new folder. "Let's talk about money." The second folder was considerably thicker than the first. Vance spread its contents methodically across the table, creating a visual display of documents, charts, and photographs that told a story of systematic financial abuse. The E Street Group, he began a political consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., founded in 2017, owned and operated by one Tim Minette, currently your husband. Omar straightened in her chair slightly. This territory was more familiar. She had prepared talking points for campaign finance questions. Her communications team had drilled her on responses. Tim runs a legitimate consulting business that serves multiple Democratic campaigns across the country. Let me stop you right there, Congresswoman. Vance held up a financial summary document. Over 4 years, your campaign and affiliated political action committees paid the E Street Group a total of just over $2.99 million. Let me put that number in proper context. He pulled out a comparison chart that showed spending levels across multiple campaigns. The average spending on political consulting for a House member in a safe district like yours, a district where you win by 30 or 40 points every election, is approximately $200,000 per election cycle. You spent over $700,000 per cycle. That's 350% above the average for comparable members. My campaign had unique requirements. A national profile requires national-level communication strategy. Your campaign had unique requirements, Vance repeated slowly, such as paying for your boyfriend's divorce from his wife. The chamber stirred audibly. This detail had been rumored but never documented publicly. In 2019, Tim Minette filed for divorce from his wife, Beth Minette. The divorce filing specifically cited his romantic affair with you as the primary cause of the marriage's dissolution. Beth Minette's attorneys estimated the total legal fees for the contentious proceedings at approximately $85,000. Vance held up bank records and campaign finance filings. In the 6-week period immediately surrounding the divorce filing, your campaign made 4 separate payments to the East Street Group totaling $87,000. Every payment was listed as he read directly from the filing's digital consulting services, end quote. He set the documents down. We've obtained the East Street Group's internal records through the cooperation of a former employee. During that 6-week period, no digital products were delivered to your campaign. No websites were launched. No online advertising campaigns were created. No social media strategies were implemented. The invoices were generated. The payments were made. And no actual work was performed. Omar's attorney was writing furiously on his legal pad. She could see him preparing objections that both of them knew would never be sustained. Campaign payments to vendors are not required to be itemized by specific project deliverable. That's standard practice across all political organizations in both parties. Standard practice. Vance nodded thoughtfully. I've heard that phrase a lot during my time in politics. Let's talk about some more of your standard practices. He pulled out travel expense records. February 2020. Your campaign expense report shows 2 first-class airline tickets to Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The stated purpose, filed with the Federal Election Commission, was, quote, international donor outreach and relationship building. End quote, total cost charged to your campaign donors, $14,600. Here he looked up from the document. Who did you meet with in Dubai, Congresswoman? Which donors? What relationships were built? I'm not required by law to disclose the specific details of confidential donor meetings. You are required to disclose that campaign expenditures serve legitimate campaign purposes. When the FEC conducted a preliminary audit of this expense, your campaign was unable to produce a single meeting record. Not one calendar entry, not one donor contact name, not one follow-up email, not one thank you note, nothing. He pulled out photographs, but there are social media posts from that week. These images were captured from Tim Minette's Instagram account before he made it private and began deleting content. The photographs appeared on the chamber's display screens, Omar and Manette at the observation deck of the Burj Khalifa, at a luxury beach resort, at what appeared to be an exclusive nightclub. Champagne, swimsuits, five-star accommodations, night-if. Not exactly what comes to mind when you hear the phrase donor outreach. Vance set the photographs down. Your campaign donors, the teachers and nurses and retail workers who gave you $25 because they believed in your message. They paid for a romantic vacation to Dubai, and you filed paperwork calling it outreach. Those photographs are being taken completely out of context. Then provide the context, Congresswoman. Please, I'm genuinely asking. The context is that I was speaking about the discrimination and civil liberties violations that Muslim Americans faced in the aftermath of September 11th. The surveillance programs, the hate crimes, the suspicion and fear. That was my point. The aftermath. Then, why didn't you say that clearly? Why didn't you say, quote, after terrorists attacked America and murdered 3,000 innocent people, Muslim Americans unfairly faced discrimination, end quote. Why did you minimize the attack itself? Reduce it to, some people did something in order to make your point about what came after. I did not minimize. You called it something, Congresswoman. Something is what you call a minor inconvenience. Something is what you call a flat tire or a canceled meeting, not the deliberate, planned, coordinated murder of thousands of your fellow Americans. Vance pulled out additional documentation, but maybe that was just unfortunate word choice, a single moment of careless phrasing. So let's look at whether there's a pattern. He spread out a series of video transcripts, interview excerpts, and social media printouts. 2012, you post on social media that, quote, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. End quote. He looked at her hypnotized, classic anti-Semitic language invoking Jewish mind control and secret manipulation. You eventually issued what you called an apology. Sort of. He moved to the next document. 2019. During a committee hearing, you were asked point-blank on camera whether Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization. A simple yes or no question. You refused to answer directly. You talked around it. You provided context. You discussed American foreign policy, but you never actually said the word yes. Another document, 2020, asked at a town hall to condemn Antifa violence against federal buildings and police officers. You called Antifa, quote, an idea rather than an organization, end quote. You refused to condemn specific violent acts committed by people identifying with that movement. Another 2021, the Armenian Genocide Resolution, a formal recognition of established historical fact that the Ottoman government systematically murdered over 1 million Armenian civilians. Every Democrat in the House voted yes. You were the only one to vote present. He looked at her. There's a clear pattern here, Congresswoman. Whenever you're asked to clearly and unequivocally condemn something that might offend certain foreign governments or certain political constituencies, you care about. You evade. You equivocate. You find some way to avoid saying what any loyal American should be able to say, without a moment's hesitation. Omar's carefully maintained composure was visibly crumbling. Her voice rose. I have condemned terrorism countless times throughout my career. I have then do it now clearly, directly, without qualification or context. Vance leaned forward in his chair. Say these exact words. Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization that murdered innocent Americans, and they deserve to be destroyed. Silence stretched through the chamber. Say it, Congresswoman. It should be the easiest thing in the world for an American elected official to say. Omar's jaw tightened. Her eyes flashed with something between defiance and fear. I don't take orders from you about which specific words I must use to express then use your own words. Tell us in whatever phrasing you choose how you feel about the organization that murdered 3,000 Americans, including Michael Wilson, whose widow we just heard from. Tell his children. Tell the country. More silence. The fact that you can't do it, that you won't do it, tells everyone watching exactly where your loyalties really lie. Something inside Omar finally snapped. The dam broke. You want to know what I think? You want to know what I really think about all of this? She was shouting now. All pretense of diplomatic restraint gone. All carefully practiced talking points abandoned. I think America has committed more violence around the world than Al-Qaeda could ever dream of committing.
I think American foreign policy has killed more Muslim children than any terrorist organization in history.
I think you're all hypocrites who drop bombs on wedding parties and then lecture me about terrorism. The chamber gasped collectively, but she wasn't finished. Every single time someone has the courage to criticize Israel, you drag out the Holocaust. Every time someone questions American imperialism, you drag out September 11th. Maybe if American foreign policy wasn't completely controlled by IPAC lobbyists and wealthy Jewish donors. She stopped abruptly. The words hung in the air like poison. She heard what she had said, what she had revealed. Did you want to finish that thought, Congresswoman? Vance asked quietly. About Jewish donors controlling American foreign policy.
Omar said nothing. Her face had gone pale. Her hands trembled slightly on the table.
I think you just told us exactly who you really are and exactly what you really believe. Vance straightened the papers in front of him with deliberate calm. Let me summarize the pattern of evidence we've seen today. You committed immigration fraud by marrying your biological brother. You systematically stole from your campaign donors to enrich yourself and your family. You took money from foreign governments through hidden channels and advocated for their interests. You described the murder of 3,000 Americans as something. You refused to directly condemn Al-Qaeda. And when pressed, you start ranting about Jewish control of America. He shook his head slowly. You took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, Congresswoman. Everything you do, everything you say, everything in your financial records suggests that your actual loyalty lies somewhere else entirely. He closed the final folder. The committee will now proceed to vote on the matter of formal referral to the Department of Justice. Marcus Webb stood up slowly from his chair. His face had aged a decade in the past few hours. Mr. Vice President, I need to address the committee. Vance nodded. Counsel is recognized. The attorney's voice was strained, as if every word was being extracted against his will. After the testimony and evidence presented today, including recordings and documents that were not disclosed to me by my client during our preparation, I find myself in an impossible ethical and professional position. Omar turned to him with dawning horror. Marcus, what are you doing? He still wouldn't meet her eyes. The rules of professional conduct require me to provide competent representation. They prohibit me from making false statements to tribunals. Based on what I have heard today, I can no longer fulfill these obligations. He began methodically packing his briefcase. I am withdrawing as counsel for Representative Omar. Effective immediately. Marcus. Omar grabbed his arm with desperate strength. You can't abandon me. Not now. Not in front of everyone. I'm sorry, Ilhan. His voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for her. But I will not put my law license and my reputation at risk because you didn't tell me the truth. I won't sacrifice my career to protect your lies. He pulled his arm free and walked toward the chamber exit. The cameras tracked his departure. Every step, every click of his shoes on the marble floor. The heavy doors closed behind him. Omar stood alone at the witness table. No attorney, no ally. The empty chair beside her, a visual representation of her isolation. Vance's voice was measured almost clinical. The Congresswoman may request a recess to obtain new legal representation if she wishes, or she may proceed without counsel. That choice is hers. Omar's voice cracked. I want to make a statement. You'll have that opportunity. But first, we will hear from the other members of this committee. Senator Amy Klobuchar cleared her throat. She had known Omar for years, had campaigned for her, had defended her publicly against what she called unfair attacks, had called the accusations against her colleague racist and Islamophobic. I have a statement I need to read into the record. The chamber shifted. Something significant was happening. After reviewing the evidence presented today, the documentation of foreign payments, the audio recordings made by Mr. Minette, the DNA analysis regarding the marriage question, the Congresswoman's own statements during this hearing, I find myself deeply, profoundly troubled. She looked at Omar. Something that might have been an apology flickered across her face. Or perhaps it was just self-preservation. While Representative Omar retains the presumption of innocence that all Americans deserve, I believe a thorough and independent investigation by the Department of Justice is not only warranted, but absolutely necessary for the integrity of this institution. Omar stared at her with open disbelief and betrayal. Amy, after everything we've been through together, after all the times you defended me, you're going to— I take no pleasure in this, Ilhan. None whatsoever. But the evidence presented today is too substantial to dismiss. The questions raised are too serious to ignore. I have a duty to my constituents in Minnesota and to the country that supersedes personal loyalty. One by one, other Democrats on the committee made similar statements. Senator Fetterman, Senator Warrow, Senator Hassan. Not all of them spoke, but enough did. The squad's public solidarity, always more performance than genuine unity, crumbled visibly. A staffer handed Vance a paper that had just been printed. He read it silently, then looked up. A statement has just been released by Representative Rashida. I will read the relevant portion into the record. Omar's eyes widened. Rashida, her closest ally, her sister in the struggle. Quote, over the past several months, evidence has come to light that Representative Omar chose not to share with her colleagues in the Progressive Caucus. Information that, had I known it at the time, would have fundamentally changed how I approached defending her against criticism. Vance continued reading. I cannot in good conscience oppose a thorough investigation. While I continue to believe that Representative Omar has faced genuine bigotry throughout her career, I also believe that legitimate questions deserve answers. I urge my colleague to cooperate fully with investigators. End quote. Even Rashida had abandoned her. The woman she had called her sister, her partner in changing Congress. Omar looked around the chamber with the desperate eyes of a trapped animal. Colleagues who wouldn't meet her gaze. Staffers suddenly fascinated by their phones. The cameras that kept recording, preserving every moment of her isolation. This is a conspiracy, she heard herself saying. Her voice sounded strange, distant. All of you working together, the Republicans and the sellout Democrats, and the deep state Congresswoman. Vince's voice cut through her spiral. You will have an opportunity to make a full statement. But first, this committee will conduct its vote on the referral motion. I demand to be heard now. You will be heard after the vote. That is the regular order of business, and we will follow it. The vote was called. The clerk read each name 12-6, a decisive bipartisan majority. Republicans voting yes as expected, but also Democrats, members of her own party, people she had worked with, fundraised with, marched with, all voting to send her case to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. When the final tally was announced, Vance addressed her formally. The motion carries. This committee will prepare a comprehensive referral to the Department of Justice for investigation of immigration fraud, campaign finance violations, violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and potential obstruction of justice based on the Congresswoman's statements during this hearing. He paused. Congresswoman Omar, you may now make a statement for the record. She rose to her feet. Her legs barely supported her. Her hijab was slightly askew. The polished camera-ready image she had spent years constructing lay in ruins around her. What happened here today was not justice. It was not oversight. It was political assassination. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. A black Muslim refugee woman who had the courage to tell uncomfortable truths about American foreign policy has been subjected to a show trial orchestrated by her political enemies. She glared at Vance. My words have been twisted. My faith has been weaponized against me. My family has been dragged through the mud. All because I dared to challenge the powerful. Her voice rose to a scream. You think you've destroyed me? You think this is the end? I have information on everyone in this room. Every Republican who ever took money from Israel. Every Democrat who sold out their principles to AIPAC. You want to investigate me? I'll burn this entire institution down before I let you silence me. Security officers at the edges of the chamber began moving closer. I will not be erased. I came to this country with nothing. I built everything this nation owes me. She pointed at the American flag hanging behind Vance. That flag means nothing. It's just a piece of cloth that you wave to justify murdering my people, bombing Muslim children, occupying countries that never threatened you. The chamber watched in stunned silence as her complete breakdown unfolded on live television. Vance's voice was steady, almost gentle. Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the Congresswoman from the chamber. Don't touch me, she screamed as two officers approached carefully. I'm a United States Congresswoman. I have rights. This is America. You're the subject of a federal criminal referral, ma'am. Vance's voice remained calm. And you just threatened to burn down the Capitol on camera. I strongly suggest you stop talking. They led her toward the exit, not in handcuffs, but not gently either. She was still screaming as the heavy doors closed behind her about conspiracies, about persecution, about revenge she would take on everyone who had betrayed her. The cameras captured every moment. Vance waited until silence returned to the chamber. This hearing is now adjourned. The referral documents will be transmitted to the Department of Justice within 48 hours. He brought the gavel down one final time. May God have mercy on us all. The footage spread across the internet like wildfire in dry brush. Within an hour, clips of Omar's meltdown were everywhere. Her screaming about burning down the Capitol, her rant calling the American flag meaningless cloth, her threats against colleagues. Her face contorted with rage as security officers led her away. Within 2 hours, the #Omar meltdown was trending in over 30 countries. Cable networks cleared their prime-time schedules for continuous coverage. Political analysts who had spent years defending her against criticism struggled to find words. Within 3 hours, the Speaker of the House announced that Omar would be immediately stripped of all committee assignments pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Within 24 hours, members of her own Minneapolis district office began resigning. In Cedar Riverside, the heart of the Somali American community, that had launched her career, the reactions were more complicated than many expected. Fatima Hassan had arrived in Minneapolis as a refugee 2 years before Omar. She had voted for her 3 times, donated money she couldn't really afford, defended her at community meetings when others raised concerns. She sat in her small apartment that evening watching the news coverage on the television her children had bought her for her birthday. She made us all look bad, Fatima told a reporter who found her the next day. We came here because we love America, because America saved our lives when no one else would help us. And she used our story, the refugee story, the survivor story, to do these things. She shook her head slowly. I defended her for years. I told people who criticized her that they were racist. Maybe some of them were. But she was doing these things the whole time. Taking money from foreign governments, lying about her family, stealing from people who donated because they believed in her. Her voice dropped. She doesn't speak for me. She never did. I just didn't want to see it. At a Somali restaurant on Lake Street, the televisions that usually showed soccer matches from the Horn of Africa stayed tuned to American news coverage. The patrons, taxi drivers, small business owners, students, elders watched in silence. We trusted her, said Muhammad Abdi, who had driven a cab in Minneapolis for 17 years. She said she was fighting for us, fighting for immigrants, fighting for Muslims, but she was only fighting for herself. He pushed his cup of tea away, unable to drink it. My children asked me why I always supported her. What do I tell them now? That I was fooled? That I was used? Not everyone turned against her. Some in the community believed the accusations were exaggerated or fabricated entirely. Some felt that whatever mistakes she may have made, she was being treated more harshly because of her identity. But many, perhaps most, felt something simpler and more personal. Betrayal. They had invested their hope in her, their dreams, their vision of what a Somali refugee could become in America, and she had used all of it as raw material for personal enrichment and political manipulation. That evening, J.D. Vance sat alone in his office in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. The television was off. His phone was silenced. The folder of evidence was already in the hands of Justice Department prosecutors who would spend months turning it into indictments. He thought about the young woman who had walked into Congress 6 years earlier, the first Somali American elected to national office, the refugee who had become a symbol of what America could offer to the world's most desperate people. Somewhere along the way, she had made choices. Small compromises at first, a meeting that should have been disclosed, a donation that should have been reported, a payment that should have gone to legitimate services, small lies that required bigger lies to maintain, small corruptions that demanded larger ones to sustain, until she had become something unrecognizable even to herself. Had she always been this way? Had the ambition and the cynicism been there from the beginning, hidden beneath the inspiring story? Or had Washington changed her? Had power and attention corrupted something that was once genuine? He would never know. And perhaps it didn't matter. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Usha. "How are you holding up?" He stared at the message for a long moment, unsure how to answer honestly. "I did what needed to be done. What the evidence demanded doesn't mean I feel good about it." Her reply came within seconds. "That's exactly why I trust you. Come home." He gathered his things, turned off the lights, walked through the empty corridors toward the exit. Tomorrow, there would be more hearings, more investigations, more politicians who had betrayed their oaths, and the people who trusted them. The work never ended, because the temptations never stopped. Power corrupted. It always had. It always would. The only defense was people willing to do the hard thing, the right thing, even when it gave them no pleasure. 5 days after the hearing, Ilhan Omar submitted her resignation from Congress. The statement was brief, read by a spokesperson outside her Minneapolis home to a crowd of reporters and cameras. Representative Omar has decided to step back from public life to focus on her family and to prepare her legal defense against charges she continues to believe are politically motivated. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no expression of remorse for the donors she had defrauded or the institutions she had betrayed. The investigation continued without her. Grand juries were convened in both Washington and Minneapolis. Subpoenas were issued for financial records, communications, and testimony. The machinery of justice, slow but relentless, ground forward. In the Bronx, a woman who had donated $50 to Omar's PAC tore up the thank you letter she had kept framed on her wall for 3 years. In Michigan, a mosque that had once celebrated Omar as proof of Muslim achievement quietly removed her photograph from their community board. In Minnesota, the Somali American community began the long process of rebuilding their reputation. Some defended her to the very end. True believers who saw persecution where others saw evidence. Loyalists who refused to accept that their hero had feet of clay. They would continue to see conspiracy no matter what the prosecutors eventually proved. But most Americans watching from their living rooms and scrolling through their phones saw something simpler. They saw a woman who had been given everything America could offer. Refuge from war, safety from persecution, education, opportunity, freedom, and ultimately political power. And they saw someone who had used all of it to enrich herself, serve foreign interests, and express contempt for the countries that had saved her life. The refugee who became a congresswoman. The congresswoman who became a defendant. The defendant who would spend years answering for what she had done. Some people did something. That's what she had said about September 11th. And now finally something had been done about